Hello, and welcome to the channel. The story you're about to hear is about the price of stardom and how the very system that made legends also destroyed them. It reveals what happens when the cameras stop rolling, the contracts expire, and the dreams that once lit up silver screens fade into the harsh light of creditors' notices and empty bank accounts. What does it mean to have everything the world says matters? Fame, beauty, adoration, and still lose it all. How did the people whose faces defined an era end their lives with nothing? Picture the golden age, 1930s through 1950s, when Hollywood wasn't just an industry, but a dream factory, a mythology machine. The studios controlled everything: your name, your image, your salary, your life. Stars earned fortunes on paper, but saw pennies in practice. And when age, illness, or changing tastes rendered them obsolete, the machine simply moved on. August 16th, 1956. A small apartment in Los Angeles. Bela Lugosi lies in his bed, wearing the black cape that made him immortal. The Count is dying, not in a castle, not in Transylvania, but in a modest room in the city that gave him everything and took it all back. He's 73 years old. His fifth wife, Hope, 37 years younger, sits nearby. When he dies that evening, his estate will be valued at exactly $1,900. Frank Sinatra will pay for his funeral. 25 years earlier, Bela Lugosi was the most terrifying man in cinema. The year was 1931, and Universal Studios needed someone to play Count Dracula. The stage actor from Hungary, with his thick accent and theatrical gestures, seemed like a risk. But when the camera captured his face, those eyes that stare, the way he moved, something magical and monstrous happened. He didn't just play Dracula, he became Dracula. Audiences had never seen anything like it. The film was a sensation. Lugosi became instantly recognizable. Children dressed as him for Halloween. Adults imitated his voice. "I want to drink your blood" entered the cultural lexicon. He was famous. He was a star. And he was trapped. Because Hollywood, having found what worked, refused to let him be anything else. Studios wanted Dracula, or variations of Dracula. Mad scientists, sinister foreigners, creatures of the night. Lugosi wanted to act, to show range, to play heroes or lovers or ordinary men. But his accent, thick and unmistakably foreign, limited him in the sound era, and his association with horror was too strong. Audiences wanted the monster. Studios gave them the monster. And Lugosi, needing to work, played the monster. The paychecks told the story of his decline. In the early 1930s, he commanded respectable sums. By the 1940s, he was appearing in Poverty Row productions, cheap horror films made in days, not weeks, with budgets measured in thousands, not tens of thousands. Films with titles like The Ape Man and Voodoo Man. Films that played in second-run theaters and drive-ins. Films that paid him a fraction of what he'd earned a decade earlier. Meanwhile, other horror actors thrived. Boris Karloff, who'd played Frankenstein's monster, successfully transitioned to varied roles. Vincent Price commanded both respect and steady work. Peter Lorre built a career on character parts. But Lugosi, imprisoned by his accent and his image, watched the opportunities go to others. The physical pain didn't help. He'd served in World War I, fighting for Austria-Hungary, and carried injuries from those years. Sciatica, chronic back pain. In an era when pain management meant opiates, doctors prescribed morphine. It helped. It worked. And then it was necessary. And then it was addiction. Medical bills accumulated. 3 divorces had cost him dearly. He supported family members back in Hungary when he could. Money slipped through his fingers like smoke. And unlike Dracula, there would be no resurrection, no sequel that restored his fortunes. By the 1950s, he was playing himself, the has-been horror star in cheap science fiction films. Ed Wood, a director whose enthusiasm exceeded his talent, cast him in movies so inept they would later become cult classics for all the wrong reasons. Bride of the Monster, Plan 9 from Outer Space. Lugosi worked on the latter while seriously ill, dying before production wrapped. Wood used footage of Lugosi's stand-in, a chiropractor who looked nothing like him, holding a cape over his face. In 1955, desperate and addicted, Lugosi did something brave. He checked himself into a state hospital to treat his morphine addiction. At 72, he fought to get clean. The press covered it. Former star's humiliation made good copy. But he emerged sober, dignified, and just as broke as before. He married Hope Lininger in 1955. She was young enough to be his granddaughter. Perhaps she saw the man beneath the monster. Perhaps he needed someone to care for him in his final years. They had months together, not years. When Bela Lugosi died on August 16, 1956, he was buried in his Dracula cape. It seemed fitting. The cape had defined him, imprisoned him, and now would accompany him to the grave. His son, Bela Jr., arranged for the burial. Frank Sinatra, who'd never met Lugosi but respected his contribution to cinema, quietly paid the funeral expenses. The estate inventory was brutal in its brevity. $1,900. A lifetime in Hollywood, decades of work, the most iconic horror performance in cinema history, worth less than a used car. But here's the final irony. Bela Lugosi's image never died. The cape, the stare, the accent, they live forever. His Dracula has been merchandised for decades, generating millions in licensing fees he never saw. Every Halloween, thousands of children dress as Count Dracula. Every film reference, every parody, every homage traces back to that 1931 performance. The man died penniless, the monster became immortal. And somewhere in that contradiction lies everything wrong with the dream factory that created them both. The 1960s, the Martha Washington Hotel in New York City. A woman with stringy hair and a weathered face works the bar shift, pouring drinks for customers who don't recognize her. They see a middle-aged barmaid, nothing special, certainly not beautiful. She prefers it this way. The anonymity protects her from questions, from pity, from the inevitable conversation about what happened. This is Veronica Lake. 20 years earlier, her face launched 1,000 imitations. Her hair, that peekaboo hairstyle, sweeping across one eye in a cascade of blonde waves, became a national obsession. Women across America copied it. Magazines featured it. Her studio built an entire image around it. She was the epitome of 1940s film noir sophistication, cool and mysterious and untouchable. Now she's pouring bourbon for strangers who don't know her name. The peak came early, 1941, 1942, 1943. Those were Veronica Lake's years, paired with Alan Ladd in This Gun for Hire and The Glass Key. She created a screen chemistry that defined an era. She was tiny, 4'11", which made Ladd, himself short by Hollywood standards, look taller. They fit together perfectly on screen, two beautiful people in shadows and cigarette smoke, playing characters as damaged as they were attractive. The peekaboo hair was everything. Constance Ockelman from Brooklyn had transformed into Veronica Lake, and that hair was the transformation's visible symbol. The studio controlled it completely, how it was cut, how it was styled, when she could change it. They controlled everything else too. Her weight, which they demanded she keep at exactly 100 pounds. Her public appearances, her quotes to the press, her contracts, which paid her $350 a week, while her films grossed millions. She made them rich. They made her famous. The exchange seemed fair until it wasn't. The War Department issued a request. Women working in factories, inspired by Veronica Lake's hairstyle, were getting their long hair caught in machinery. Accidents were happening. Injuries. Deaths even. Could she please change her hair? For the war effort. For safety. Veronica Lake complied. She posed for publicity photos with her hair pinned up, setting a new example. She did her patriotic duty, and her mystique evaporated almost overnight. The hair had been the hook, the defining visual element that separated Veronica Lake from every other pretty blonde in Hollywood. Without it, she was just another actress. The roles began drying up. Studios that had featured her in A pictures moved her to B movies. Her drinking, which had always been present, increased. The pressure to maintain that impossible weight, 100 pounds on a frame nearly 5 feet tall, led to diet pills and alcohol, a combination that destroyed her health and her judgment. By 1948, Paramount dropped her contract. She was 26 years old. Her career was essentially over. What follows is the slow descent that happens when beauty is your only currency, and beauty fades. A bad marriage to director Andre de Toth produced 4 children and ended in bitter divorce. Another marriage, equally unsuccessful. Work in summer stock theaters, playing to small audiences in small towns. Television appearances that paid little. Off-Broadway productions that paid even less. The money disappeared. Child support payments she couldn't afford. Medical bills. Rent on apartments that got smaller and shabbier with each move. The trajectory was only downward. By the early 1960s, Veronica Lake was broke. Not Hollywood broke, where you sell the second house and keep the first. Actually broke. Working as a barmaid broke. Unable to pay rent broke. Her beauty, the thing that had made her valuable to the machine, had abandoned her. The blonde hair was dull and grey. The porcelain skin was lined and tired. The 90-pound frame was shapeless. She worked at the Martha Washington Hotel, then as a maid in a different hotel. Jobs that paid minimum wage. Jobs that required no skill except showing up and doing what you're told. The same jobs millions of women held, except Veronica Lake had once been a movie star. The drinking continued. Hepatitis developed, likely from the alcoholism. Her health deteriorated through the 1960s and into the 1970s. She made occasional attempts at comebacks, a low-budget film here, a stage production there, but nothing stuck. Hollywood had moved on. The industry that created her had no use for a 50-year-old former star whose peak had been 3 decades earlier. She died on July the 7th, 1973, in Burlington, Vermont. Hepatitis, an acute hepatitis. She was 50 years old. The obituaries were brief. Most mentioned the peekaboo hair. Few mentioned that she died nearly penniless, far from Hollywood, long forgotten by the industry that had made her famous. Here's the cruelest irony. Her films were rediscovered in the late 1970s. Film noir became a subject of serious academic study. Critics and scholars began writing about Veronica Lake, not as a hairstyle, but as an actress, recognizing her understated performances and her contribution to the genre. Retrospectives were held. Essays were written. A whole generation discovered her films and fell in love with that cool, mysterious presence. But she died in 1973, just before the Renaissance, just before the recognition. She died believing she'd been nothing but a hairstyle, a brief moment of wartime glamour that faded when the war ended and the hair was pinned up. She died without money, without recognition, without understanding that her work would outlive her and be valued long after the studios that exploited her were gone. The woman pouring drinks at the Martha Washington Hotel was invisible, the woman on screen, frozen forever in black and white, her hair falling across one eye, her expression unreadable, became immortal. But immortality came too late to save her from dying broke, alone, and forgotten in a Vermont hospital. The peekaboo girl fell, and no one caught her. March 3rd, 1966, Hollywood Boulevard, the Knickerbocker Hotel. William Frawley, 79 years old, exits a movie theater after watching a film. He's alone, as usual. He walks toward his hotel, heading home for the evening. Then he collapses on the sidewalk. Passers-by recognize him immediately. Fred Mertz, from I Love Lucy. Everyone knows Fred Mertz. Grumpy, lovable, the landlord and best friend to Ricky Ricardo, the long-suffering husband to Ethel. Millions of Americans have invited Fred Mertz into their living rooms every week for years. Someone calls an ambulance, but William Frawley dies before it arrives, there on the sidewalk, surrounded by strangers who know his face but not his life. When they inventory his estate, the numbers tell a story. Not destitute, but modest, small. The estate of a man who had been on one of the most successful television shows in history, watched by 40 million people weekly at its peak, but who'd never gotten rich from it. I Love Lucy premiered in 1951. William Frawley was already a Hollywood veteran. He'd been working in vaudeville since 1914, films since the 1930s. He'd appeared in over 100 movies, always in supporting roles, always reliable, never a star. He was a working actor, which in Hollywood terms means constantly employed, but never wealthy. When Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz were casting their new sitcom, they needed someone to play Fred Mertz. Frawley was suggested. He was perfect. The timing, the gruffness, the ability to be both funny and exasperated. There was one problem: his reputation. Frawley drank, not socially, but seriously. He was known as difficult, unreliable when drunk, prone to missing work. Desi Arnaz took a chance. He hired Frawley with one condition: if he missed even one day of work due to drinking, he'd be fired immediately. Frawley agreed, and for the entire run of I Love Lucy, he never missed a single day. He showed up sober, professional, and delivered exactly what the show needed. Fred Mertz became iconic. The grumpy landlord with the terrible singing voice and the stingy habits. The man who bickered with his wife Ethel, but clearly loved her. The loyal friend who got roped into Lucy's schemes. Frawley played him perfectly, not as a cartoon, but as a real person, recognizable and human. I Love Lucy ran from 1951 to 1957. Those 6 years made Lucille Ball one of the wealthiest women in entertainment, made Desi Arnaz a powerful producer, made the show itself a landmark in television history, and it made William Frawley famous, beloved, and modestly compensated. Because this was the early days of television, before actors understood residuals, before unions fought for reruns to generate additional payment, before anyone realized that shows would be rebroadcast for decades, generating revenue long after production ended. Frawley earned a salary, a decent one, better than most Americans made. But when the show ended, so did the paycheck. And I Love Lucy never really ended. It went into immediate syndication, airing multiple times daily on channels across America. Millions continued watching. The show generated millions in revenue. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, who owned the production company, benefited enormously. William Frawley got nothing beyond his original salary. He watched himself on television, performing in reruns, while earning nothing from those broadcasts. His face remained famous. His bank account remained modest. After I Love Lucy ended, he landed another steady role, Bub O'Casey on My Three Sons, which ran from 1960 to 1965. Again, he was reliable, professional, well liked by the cast and crew. The show was successful, and again, he earned a salary but no ownership, no percentage, no stake in the show's continued success. But here's the thing about William Frawley. He was alone, never married, or if he had been, it had ended long ago. No children, few close friends. His life was his work, and his work was playing characters in other people's families. He lived at the Knickerbocker Hotel, a residence hotel for people who needed a place to stay, but not a home to maintain. His socializing happened at the track. He loved betting on horses, and occasionally at bars, though he'd kept his drinking under control since that first day on I Love Lucy. When My Three Sons let him go in 1965, he was 78, and the show wanted to move in a different direction. He found himself without work for the first time in decades. He was too old for new roles. His health was declining, and he was alone. The loneliness of his death reflects the loneliness of his later years. Dying on the sidewalk after a movie, surrounded by people who recognized Fred Mertz, but didn't know William Frawley. No wife to notify, no children to mourn him, just the formality of estate settlement and a funeral attended by industry colleagues who respected his professionalism more than they knew his person. His estate went primarily to Catholic institutions, churches and charities. It was a modest sum, nothing like what you'd expect from someone who'd been on 2 successful television shows. Not poverty, but not prosperity either. Just the accumulated savings of a working actor who'd lived modestly, spent reasonably, and never gotten the windfall that residuals would have provided. The quiet tragedy of William Frawley isn't dramatic bankruptcy or public humiliation. It's the slow fade of someone who was everywhere and then nowhere, whose face remained famous. Fred Mertz lived forever in syndication, while his life remained small and ultimately solitary. Who gave audiences decades of laughter and companionship, but ended his own life without either. He died as he'd lived the last years, alone, recognizable, forgotten. The cameras had stopped rolling. The audience had moved on to other shows, other characters, and William Frawley, who'd made millions of people laugh, died on a Hollywood sidewalk, with strangers calling his character's name. Fred Mertz lived forever. William Frawley died alone. 1970s, a Catholic rectory in Rhode Island. A woman in her 50s scrubs floors, prepares meals for priests, and maintains the building. She's grateful for the work. The room is clean and quiet. The $50 a week helps. She's sober now, and being useful feels like redemption. This is Betty Hutton. In 1950, she commanded $150,000 per picture. The trajectory from there to here is steep, brutal, and entirely American. It's the story of talent meeting temperament, of independence colliding with an industry built on control, of someone who refused to be owned discovering that refusal had consequences. Betty Hutton exploded onto screens in the 1940s with an energy that seemed barely containable. She didn't just perform, she detonated. Singing, dancing, acting, all at maximum volume and velocity. Paramount Pictures built her into a major star, capitalizing on her manic energy and powerhouse vocals. She was the blonde bombshell who could actually do everything. Sing like a Broadway star, dance like a professional, act with genuine emotion beneath the chaos. The peak came in 1950. Judy Garland, originally cast as Annie Oakley in MGM's Annie, Get Your Gun, couldn't complete filming due to her own struggles with addiction and mental health. The production needed a replacement who could sing, act, shoot, and embody the legendary sharpshooter. Betty Hutton got the call. She was magnificent. The film was a massive success. Her performance of There's No Business Like Show Business became definitive. She proved she wasn't just a novelty act, but a genuine triple threat talent. This should have been the launching pad for decades of success. Instead, it was the beginning of the end. Betty Hutton had a reputation. Difficult, demanding, temperamental. She walked off sets. She fought with directors. She insisted on creative control. In the 1940s and 1950s, when studios owned actors through contracts that dictated every aspect of their professional lives, this was career suicide. Talent mattered, but obedience mattered more. The breaking point came in 1952. A dispute with Paramount over a contract and creative control led Hutton to walk out. She believed her talent and box office success gave her leverage. She was wrong. Paramount let her go. And then, quietly, efficiently, Hollywood closed ranks. No major studio would touch her. She was 31 years old. Her career was effectively over. What followed was a spiral that took decades to hit bottom. Television appearances that paid a fraction of what films had. Nightclub acts in smaller and smaller venues. Failed comeback attempts that went nowhere. The money that had seemed endless during her peak years disappeared into multiple divorces, each one expensive and emotionally devastating. Then the pills, prescription medication for anxiety, for depression, for the constant pressure of trying to recapture something that was already gone. The addiction developed gradually, then completely. It destroyed what remained of her career prospects and consumed what remained of her money. By 1974, Betty Hutton was destitute. Not Hollywood broke with a smaller house and fewer servants. Actually, destitute. No money, no prospects, nowhere to live. She was estranged from her 3 daughters, relationships destroyed by her addiction and instability. She had nothing. The rectory job was genuine charity. The priests who hired her knew who she was. Impossible not to, even 20 years after her last significant role. But they treated her with dignity, giving her useful work and a safe place to live. The $50 weekly wasn't payment so much as acknowledgement. The real compensation was the room, the meals, the routine, the sense that she had some purpose beyond the wreckage of her past. She got sober in that rectory. Not easily, not quickly, but eventually. The structure helped. The lack of access to pills and alcohol helped. The simple fact of having to show up each day and do honest work helped. Slowly, painfully, she rebuilt something resembling a life. She never got rich again, never had a comeback, never reconciled completely with all her daughters, though relationships gradually improved. She lived simply, worked steadily, and stayed sober. When she died in 2007, at 86, she'd lived more than 3 decades past her Hollywood career, more than 30 years of being Betty Hutton, the person, rather than Betty Hutton, the star. The question that haunts her story is impossible to answer. Was her temperament her downfall? Or was she simply a woman who refused to be controlled in an industry built entirely on controlling women? Consider the facts. She was talented, genuinely, remarkably talented. Her performances hold up decades later. She wasn't difficult because she was unprofessional. She was difficult because she wanted creative control over her own performances. She walked away from Paramount because they refused to let her have any say in her career. In a different era, with different power structures, her independence might have been called artistic integrity, but in 1950s Hollywood, it was called difficult, and difficult women didn't work. Meanwhile, difficult men, directors who screamed, actors who showed up drunk, producers who made impossible demands, continued working. The gendered double standard was absolute. Men who demanded control were auteurs. Women who demanded control were unemployable. Betty Hutton lived long enough to see that change, at least partially. She lived long enough to see women directors, women producers, women with actual power in Hollywood. She lived long enough to be rediscovered by film historians who appreciated her talent and recognized the system that destroyed her career. But she never got the apology, never got the recognition while it could have helped, never got compensated for the decades of work that continued generating revenue long after Paramount stopped paying her. She got sobriety, she got peace, she got to rebuild relationships with her daughters, she got 30 years of life beyond the wreckage. But she never got rich again. The blonde bombshell who once commanded the screen died, having found dignity in obscurity, purpose in simplicity, and redemption in a Rhode Island rectory where nobody cared that she'd once been a star. From $150,000 per picture to $50 a week, from Paramount's lot to a priest's kitchen, from the peak of Hollywood glamour to scrubbing floors in Rhode Island. The distance between those 2 points is more than geography. It's the distance between what Hollywood promises and what it actually delivers, between fame and fortune, between being a star and being a person. Betty Hutton traveled that distance and survived it. That might be the most remarkable performance of her life. September 30th, 1978. Caesar's Palace, Las Vegas. The showroom is full, the audience attentive. Edgar Bergen, 75 years old, performs his nightclub act with the 2 wooden companions who made him famous. Charlie McCarthy, the wisecracking dummy in the top hat and monocle, and Mortimer Snerd, the country bumpkin. The act is polished, professional, familiar. Bergen has been doing this for more than 50 years. The audience laughs at the right moments. Charlie delivers his insults with perfect timing. Mortimer plays the fool expertly. Edgar Bergen, the man whose lips barely move, whose ventriloquism is so skillful that radio audiences believed Charlie McCarthy was a separate person, performs with the ease of someone who's done this thousands of times. Hours later, in his hotel room, Edgar Bergen dies in his sleep. Kidney failure. Quick, relatively painless. He dies having just done what he'd always done: perform. It seems like a good death for an entertainer, working until the end, dying with his boots on, so to speak. Then they read his estate, and the numbers reveal a truth he'd hidden behind decades of professional success. Edgar Bergen, despite being one of the most famous entertainers of his era, died with surprising financial struggles. Not destitute, but far from wealthy. The man who'd commanded enormous salaries during radio's golden age had somehow not translated that success into lasting security. The 1930s and 1940s belonged to Edgar Bergen. Radio was the dominant entertainment medium, and Bergen did something that seemed impossible. He became radio's biggest star as a ventriloquist. Think about that paradox. Ventriloquism is a visual art. The whole point is seeing the dummy's mouth move, while the performer's doesn't. On radio, none of that matters. You can't see anything. But Bergen's genius was making Charlie McCarthy into a character so vivid, so distinct, that listeners didn't need to see him. Charlie had a personality. Brash, witty, slightly obnoxious, charming in his very impertinence. He insulted guests, flirted with female stars, got away with saying things Edgar Bergen could never say directly. The chemistry between them felt real because Bergen treated Charlie as a separate entity, someone to argue with, someone to be exasperated by. The Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy show ran from 1937 to 1956 on radio. At its peak, it reached millions of listeners weekly. Bergen earned enormous sums the kind of money that should have set him up for life. Major sponsors paid premium rates. He was as famous as any movie star, as recognizable as any politician. Charlie McCarthy had a fan club. The dummy received more mail than most actors. Then television arrived, and Bergen, along with Charlie and Mortimer, made the transition. The show ran from 1950 to 1954 on television. It was successful, but less so than the radio version, because seeing Bergen perform ventriloquism revealed what radio had hidden. His lips did move, slightly. The illusion was less perfect visually than it had been orally, and television wanted different kinds of variety entertainment. The format that had dominated radio felt dated on screen. The show ended. Bergen continued performing. Nightclubs, television guest appearances, special events. He remained famous, beloved by audiences who'd grown up with Charlie McCarthy. But the steady income from a weekly show disappeared, and with it went the financial security he'd enjoyed for nearly 20 years. Where did the money go? Bad investments, primarily. Bergen trusted financial advisors who promised returns that never materialized. Business ventures that seemed sound but weren't. Real estate deals that went sideways. The usual ways that people who earn large sums but don't understand money management lose those sums. There were also expenses. A daughter, Candice Bergen, who would become a star herself, to raise and educate. Multiple homes to maintain. A lifestyle calibrated to radio-era income that didn't adjust when that income disappeared. The ordinary costs of living that don't decrease just because you're no longer earning what you once did. By the 1970s, Edgar Bergen was performing not just because he loved it, though he did, but because he needed the money. The nightclub circuit paid well for established acts with name recognition. Bergen, with Charlie and Mortimer, could still fill rooms. People wanted to see the legendary ventriloquist, wanted to hear Charlie's wisecracks one more time. So Bergen performed. In his 70s, when most people are retired, he worked. The irony is sharp. He raised a daughter who would become wealthier than he ever was. Candice Bergen's career as an actress, then as Murphy Brown on television, would make her both rich and famous. She would have the financial security her father never quite achieved. When Edgar Bergen died, she inherited not wealth, but debts and a famous name. The dummies, Charlie and Mortimer, had more market value than the estate's liquid assets. But Bergen died working, which for a performer might be the best possible ending. He didn't waste away in a retirement home forgotten by audiences. He didn't live long enough to become irrelevant. He performed his act in Las Vegas, went to sleep, and didn't wake up. Clean, quick, dignified. The financial struggles only became apparent after his death. During his life, he maintained the appearance of success, dressed well, lived in nice places, treated people graciously. No one would have guessed that the man who'd been radio's biggest star was, in his final years, working primarily out of financial necessity rather than artistic passion. The story of Edgar Bergen is quieter than some on this list. No dramatic bankruptcy, no public humiliation, no descent into addiction or destitution, just the slow erosion of wealth that happens when earning stops but expenses continue. Just the mathematics of living too long past peak earning years without having saved or invested wisely. He made millions laugh. He created characters that outlived him. Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd are still referenced, still recognized, still part of entertainment history. He was talented, professional, beloved by colleagues and audiences alike. And he died working at 75 because retirement wasn't financially viable. The ventriloquist, who made radio audiences believe in wooden dummies, couldn't make his money last longer than his career. His daughter inherited fame. The public inherited memories. And Edgar Bergen left behind the lesson that even the biggest stars, even the most successful careers, don't guarantee financial security if the money isn't managed better than the career itself. The show ended. The money was gone, but at least he died performing. January 21st, 1937. A small Hollywood apartment. The neighbors have been noticing a smell for days, but in an apartment building, smells come and go. People cook strange foods, trash sits too long, plumbing fails. No one thinks much of it until the smell becomes unbearable, until someone finally calls the police. The officers break down the door. Inside, they find Marie Prevost, 38 years old, dead on the floor. She's wearing a nightgown. Empty liquor bottles scatter the room. Her small dachshund, desperately hungry with no other food available, has partially consumed her body. The coroner's report will state acute alcoholism and malnutrition. She weighed 110 pounds. Once, she'd been Hollywood's most glamorous bathing beauty, curves and vitality personified. The 1920s belonged to girls like Marie Prevost. Mack Sennett's bathing beauties were the pin-up girls of their era. Young women in swimsuits, playful and pretty, designed to sell tickets and magazines. Marie started there, one face among many in the lineup of legs and smiles. But she had something extra: timing, charisma, an ability to be both sexy and funny, alluring and approachable. She transitioned from bathing beauty to dramatic actress, a rare feat. By the mid-1920s, she was a genuine star, appearing in successful films, earning good money, living the Hollywood life. She embodied the decade's ideal: curves, confidence, the modern woman who smoked and drank and lived freely. Her figure was celebrated. Directors cast her because she looked healthy, vibrant, alive. Then sound arrived. 1927, 1928, 1929. The transition from silent films to talkies destroyed careers overnight. Some actors had voices that didn't match their screen presence. Some had accents that limited their appeal. Some simply couldn't adapt to the new technology's demands. Marie Prevost had a fine voice. That wasn't her problem. Her problem was her body. The same curves that had made her a star in the 1920s looked wrong in the 1930s. Fashion changed. The ideal female figure changed. Studios wanted their actresses rail-thin, angular, boyish. Marie, built like the 1920s ideal, suddenly looked outdated. The studio suggested she lose weight, suggested became demanded. Her contract depended on it. Future roles depended on it. Everything she'd built depended on conforming to the new standard. So she dieted. Crash diets that destroyed her health. Starvation regimens that took the weight off, but took everything else too. The vitality disappeared. The energy that had made her performances sparkle dimmed. Her skin lost its glow. Her eyes lost their brightness. She achieved the required thinness, but became a shadow of herself. The roles dried up anyway, because she was over 30, which in 1930s, Hollywood might as well be ancient for actresses. Because even thin, she was yesterday's news. Because Hollywood moves fast, always looking for the next new face, the next fresh thing. Marie Prevost, who'd been everywhere just 5 years earlier, was nowhere. The money went first. Studios paid well during peak years, but not well enough to survive unemployment. Savings depleted. She took smaller roles in cheaper films, then bit parts, then nothing. Rent became difficult. Food became expensive. Pride prevented asking friends for help. The drinking started as social, became habitual, became necessary. Alcohol dulled the hunger, the fear, the knowledge that everything was slipping away. It was cheap calories when food was expensive. It was oblivion when reality was unbearable. The spiral accelerated. Can't get work because you're drinking. Drinking because you can't get work. Can't afford food because money goes to rent and alcohol. Can't maintain appearance because there's no money for proper food or clothes or grooming. Can't get work because you don't look right anymore. By the mid-1930s, Marie Prevost was truly broke. Not Hollywood broke with the second car sold. Actually broke. Choosing between rent and food. Spending what little money existed on the cheapest alcohol available. Too proud to beg. Too ashamed to ask for charity. Slowly starving while surrounded by the industry that had celebrated her body just a decade earlier. She lived alone with her dachshund. The dog was company, something to care for, something that needed her. When she could afford food, she fed the dog. When she couldn't, they both went hungry. The apartment was small, shabby, the kind of place that successful actresses drove past without noticing. January 1937. She'd been dead for days before anyone noticed. The dog, trapped inside with no food or water, did what survival demanded. The police who found her were hardened professionals, but the scene affected them. The empty bottles, the thin body, the small dog, starving and desperate. Hollywood reacted with brief horror. Newspapers ran stories. Colleagues expressed shock. How could this happen? How could a former star die this way? The industry promised to do better, to take care of its own. Then everyone moved on. There were films to make, careers to build, new stars to create. Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon, published decades later, would turn Marie Prevost's death into sensationalism, focusing on the gruesome details rather than the systemic failure. She became a punchline, a cautionary tale told for shock value. The talented actress who'd made audiences laugh, the beauty who'd graced magazine covers, reduced to a grotesque anecdote about a dog eating its dead owner. The truth is simpler and sadder. Marie Prevost didn't fail Hollywood. Hollywood failed her. The industry that profited from her curves demanded she eliminate them. The system that made her a star discarded her when fashion changed. The machine that created her celebrity abandoned her when she couldn't maintain impossible standards. She died of alcoholism and malnutrition, technical terms that obscure the real cause. an industry that valued women only for their appearance, that changed beauty standards on a whim, that offered no safety net when the work disappeared. She died because Hollywood, in the 1930s, viewed actresses as disposable commodities with expiration dates. Her films survive. You can watch Marie Prevost today, vibrant and alive on screen, embodying everything the 1920s celebrated. And then you remember that the woman in those films died alone, broke, starving, forgotten by the industry that made her famous. The bathing beauty drowned, not in water, but in alcohol and poverty and an industry that cared nothing for her beyond what she could provide while profitable. 1960s. A Los Angeles restaurant. An old man stands at the entrance, greeting customers as they arrive. He's dignified, well-dressed, courteous. Some customers pause, looking at him closely. The face is familiar. Older, lined, but unmistakable. They ask hesitantly, "Are you Francis X. Bushman?" The man confirms it with grace. Yes, he's Francis X. Bushman. Yes, the Francis X. Bushman. The one who earned $10,000 a week, when that was more than the president made. The first matinee idol of the movies. Now he's a restaurant greeter, paid to smile and shake hands and make diners feel special by the presence of faded Hollywood royalty. The 1910s and early 1920s belonged to Francis X. Bushman. Before Valentino, before Fairbanks, before any of the names that would later define silent film stardom, there was Bushman. He was cinema's first heartthrob, the template for every male romantic lead that followed. He had everything the camera loved: classical features that photographed beautifully, a physique built through athletics and carefully maintained, height, bearing, presence. He moved like royalty, which made sense because he often played royalty. Kings, princes, noblemen. Francis X. Bushman embodied aristocratic masculinity. Women fainted at his personal appearances. Literally fainted. Theater owners built marketing campaigns around his face. Studios marketed him as the most handsome man in the world, and audiences believed it because on screen he was perfect. The money reflected his value: $10,000 weekly. In 1916, when the average American earned perhaps $1,000 yearly, Bushman was making over $500,000 annually. He was wealthy beyond anything most Americans could imagine. He built a mansion, bought cars, lived extravagantly. Why not? The money seemed endless. The studios marketed him as the ideal bachelor, available and desirable. Millions of women imagined themselves as his potential sweetheart. His image sold movie tickets by the millions. Everything was perfect. Everything was profitable. Then came 1918. The revelation. Francis X. Bushman, the bachelor idol, was married. Had been married for years. Had children, multiple children. The whole bachelor image was a fabrication, a marketing construct designed to maximize his appeal to female audiences. The public felt betrayed. The fantasy shattered. Women who'd imagined themselves catching his eye realized they'd been lied to, deliberately and systematically. The studios had sold them a fiction, and Francis X. Bushman had gone along with it for the money. His value plummeted overnight. Not his talent, that remained unchanged. Not his appearance, he was still handsome, but the image, the brand, the marketability all collapsed. Theaters stopped building campaigns around him. Studios stopped paying premium rates. The $10,000 weeks ended. He tried to rebuild, took smaller roles, worked steadily. In 1925, he was cast as Masala in the silent version of Ben-Hur, a prestigious role in a major production. It should have been his comeback. But by 1925, he was already yesterday's news. Newer stars had emerged. Valentino had become the romantic ideal. Fairbanks owned adventure films. Bushman was respected, but no longer worshipped. Then sound arrived, delivering another blow. His theatrical acting style, perfect for silent films where performance had to be big enough to communicate without words, looked ridiculous when synchronized with sound. He couldn't adjust. The technique that had made him a star made him obsolete. The 1930s through 1960s became a long, slow decline. Character roles in B pictures, bit parts, television guest appearances, anything that paid. His name still carried weight in Hollywood. People remembered Francis X. Bushman. But memory doesn't pay bills. The money disappeared. Multiple marriages, multiple divorces, children to support. The mansion sold, the cars sold. The lifestyle that had seemed sustainable during peak earning years collapsed when peak earning ended and never returned. But here's what separates Francis X. Bushman from some others on this list. He maintained dignity. He didn't become bitter, didn't blame others, didn't descend into substance abuse or public meltdowns. He worked whatever jobs were available, did them professionally, treated people with respect. The restaurant greeter position was honest work. It paid modestly but regularly. The restaurant benefited from his presence. Having a genuine silent film star greeting customers was a novelty, a touch of old Hollywood glamour. And Bushman benefited from the salary, from having somewhere to be, from still being recognized and valued, even if not in the way he'd once been. He survived long enough to be rediscovered by film historians. The 1960s brought new interest in silent cinema. Universities started film preservation programs. Historians began documenting the early days of movies. Francis X. Bushman, still alive, became a valuable resource. He participated in documentaries about the silent era, gave interviews, shared memories. These appearances paid little, but gave him something more valuable: recognition that his work mattered, that he'd been part of something historically significant, that the films he'd made, now being preserved and studied, were art worth remembering. He died in 1966, age 83. His estate was modest, not destitute. He'd worked steadily enough to avoid complete poverty, but nothing like what you'd expect from someone who'd once been cinema's biggest star. The fortune he'd earned in the 1910s had vanished decades earlier, consumed by the ordinary expenses of living too long after relevance ended. His funeral was attended by the few remaining silent film veterans, people who remembered when Francis X. Bushman was a name that meant something, when his face sold millions of tickets, when women fainted at the sight of him. The films survive. You can watch Francis X. Bushman today in Ben-Hur, playing Masala with theatrical intensity that seems excessive now, but was perfect for its time. You can see why audiences loved him. The presence, the physicality, the way he commanded the screen. And you can know that the man in those films ended his life as a restaurant greeter, working into his 80s, not for love of greeting diners, but because bills don't stop coming, just because fame ended 40 years ago. He represents something important, the ordinary fade. Not every story is dramatic bankruptcy and public humiliation. Sometimes it's just the slow depletion of resources, the gradual descent from mansion to modest apartment, the quiet acceptance that peak years don't last and money doesn't either. Francis X. Bushman died with his dignity intact, his legacy secure, and his bank account empty. The first matinee idol set the pattern countless others would follow. Brief glory, long decline, and the struggle to maintain composure while everything fades except the memories. May 8th, 1967. A shabby apartment in San Diego. Barbara Payton lies dead. Heart and liver failure. The coroner will determine. She's 39 years old. Her body isn't discovered for hours. She's alone. The beauty that once made her Hollywood's most desired woman has completely disappeared, destroyed by alcohol, hard living, and the brutal mathematics of being valued only for appearance in an industry that worships youth. 17 years. That's the distance from studio contract to this room. 17 years from promise to grave. Late 1940s. Barbara Payton arrives in Hollywood with everything the camera loves. Stunning beauty, platinum blonde, porcelain skin. Features so perfectly symmetrical they seem sculpted. At 20 years old, she's gorgeous in a way that transcends mere attractiveness. She's breathtaking. The studios notice. Contracts are offered. Universal, then other studios. She appears in films, not starring roles immediately, but visible parts, the kind that lead to bigger things. The trajectory seems clear. Beauty this remarkable will lead to stardom. It always does. She dates the most eligible men in Hollywood. Howard Hughes, the billionaire producer and notorious womanizer. Bob Hope at the peak of his fame. Other stars, other powerful men. She's seen at the right parties, photographed at the right events. Everything is positioning her for major stardom. Then 1950, the love triangle that destroys everything. Barbara is involved with two actors, Franchot Tone, older and sophisticated, and Tom Neal, younger and volatile. Both want to marry her. She can't decide between them or won't, or enjoys the attention too much to choose. The two men fight. Not a verbal argument, a physical brawl. Tom Neal, younger and stronger, beats Franchot Tone severely. Tone ends up hospitalized with broken bones, a fractured skull. The fight makes national news. The scandal is enormous. Hollywood reacts swiftly. Barbara Payton becomes toxic. It doesn't matter that she didn't throw the punches. She's the woman who caused two men to fight. The woman at the center of scandalous behavior. Studios want glamour and publicity, but not this kind. Not violence, not vulgarity, not embarrassing headlines. The major studios drop her. She's 23 years old. Her career is effectively over before it really began. What follows is desperate, increasingly low-budget films, exploitation pictures, the kind of movies shown in drive-ins and second-run theaters, forgotten immediately after release. The paychecks shrink with the budgets. The roles become demeaning. But she needs money, needs work, needs to maintain some connection to the industry that briefly wanted her. The drinking intensifies. Started as social, became habitual, became addiction. The beauty begins to fade. Not slowly, gently, the way it happens to everyone eventually, quickly, brutally. The way it happens when you're destroying yourself with alcohol while barely eating. Relationships with men deteriorate. Some use her, some abuse her, some genuinely try to help, but can't save someone who's drowning. The money disappears, paid to landlords, spent on alcohol, given to men who promise help but deliver nothing. By the late 1950s, Barbara Payton is living on Skid Row. Literally Skid Row, the Los Angeles neighborhood, where the desperate and destitute congregate. She's arrested multiple times, drunk and disorderly, prostitution, petty crimes. The newspaper reports are brutal, comparing photographs from her glamorous years to current mugshots. The transformation is shocking. She publishes a memoir, I Am Not Ashamed. The title is defiant, but the content is devastatingly honest. She admits everything, the drinking, the pills, the prostitution. Talks about trading sex for money, for alcohol, for a place to sleep. Describes the descent in unflinching detail. The book sells modestly, generates some publicity. For a moment, it seems like maybe this honesty could be a turning point, a foundation for rebuilding. But there's no redemption arc. The publicity fades, the money from the book disappears, and Barbara Payton continues drinking, continues the slow suicide that alcohol enables. Friends from her starlet days occasionally try to intervene, offer help, offer money, offer rehabilitation. But you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, or who's too far gone to be savable. Barbara is both. The alcoholism is too advanced, the self-destruction too complete. The final years are spent in cheap apartments, cheap hotels, anywhere she can afford or convince someone to let her stay. The beauty is gone. The blonde hair is dull and damaged. The porcelain skin is weathered and grey. The perfect features are bloated from alcohol. She's unrecognizable as the woman who once dated Howard Hughes. May 1967. Heart failure, liver failure, the organs destroyed by years of alcohol abuse, simply stop working. She dies alone in that San Diego apartment. No husband, no children, no close friends nearby. Just the end of a brief, brutal trajectory from beauty to ruin. Here's the cruelty of Barbara Payton's story. The speed. 10 years from studio contract to prostitution. 7 more years to death. 17 total from promise to grave. She was 39 years old, an age when many actresses are entering their prime years for dramatic roles, for character work, for the second act of a career. Barbara Payton had been dead in all the ways that mattered, long before her body stopped functioning. The question her story raises is impossible to answer definitively. Was she weak? Or did Hollywood chew her up? She made terrible choices. The love triangle, the drinking, the decisions that accelerated her decline. Personal responsibility exists, but she was also a young, beautiful woman in a system designed to exploit young, beautiful women. A system that valued her only for appearance, that discarded her when scandal made her unmarketable, that offered no support when she fell. How much agency did she really have? She was 23 when the studios dropped her. 23, and already finished in Hollywood. What options existed for a woman whose only marketable skill was beauty, and whose beauty was the one thing the scandal had tainted? The honest answer is both. She was weak, and Hollywood was brutal. She made bad choices, and the system offered no good ones. She destroyed herself, and the industry provided the tools for destruction. Barbara Payton's films are largely forgotten. The movies she made during her brief career are mostly unavailable, lost or deliberately buried. She's remembered not for her performances, but for her descent, for being beautiful and then not, for the love triangle and the memoir and the prostitution, for dying young, broke and alone. The beauty burned bright and brief and was gone before 40. What remained, and there wasn't much, was just the warning. This is what happens when your only value is appearance, and appearance is temporary. October 26, 1952. Los Angeles. Hattie McDaniel, the first African American to win an Academy Award, dies of breast cancer. She's 57 years old. When they settle her estate, the numbers reveal what her historic achievement couldn't prevent. She dies owing more than she owns. The woman who made history at the 1940 Academy Awards, who broke a barrier that had stood since the Oscars began, dies insolvent. February 29th, 1940. The Coconut Grove nightclub in Los Angeles. The Academy Awards ceremony. Hattie McDaniel sits at a small table at the back of the room, segregated from her Gone with the Wind co-stars. The hotel hosting the event doesn't allow black guests, but the studio negotiated an exception for this one night, as long as she sits separately, away from the white attendees. Her name is called. Best Supporting Actress for her role as Mammy in Gone with the Wind. She walks to the stage, the first black performer ever to win an Oscar. The applause is genuine. This is a historic moment. Everyone understands that. She gives a brief, dignified acceptance speech, thanking the Academy, thanking the studio, saying she hopes to be a credit to her race. Then she returns to her segregated table. The ceremony continues, and nothing changes. Because winning an Oscar doesn't remake the system. It doesn't alter the fundamental structure of an industry built on racial hierarchy. Hattie McDaniel made history that night, but history didn't make her wealthy or powerful. It didn't give her better roles. It didn't protect her from the racism that permeated every aspect of Hollywood. After the Oscar, the roles didn't improve. Hollywood still only wanted black actors as servants, maids, butlers, slaves, subservient characters, reinforcing white supremacy through representation. Hattie McDaniel had won the industry's highest honor for playing a slave. The industry's response was to offer her more slave roles, more maid roles, more characters defined entirely by their service to white people. She played maids. Over and over, in film after film, Hattie McDaniel played maids, because those were the roles that existed. She was typecast as thoroughly as Bela Lugosi, but her typecasting carried additional weight, not just as a specific character type, but as a representative of her entire race, allowed on screen only in positions of servitude. The NAACP criticized her for it. Leaders in the black community argued that she was perpetuating harmful stereotypes, that every time she played a subservient character, she reinforced the racist structures they were fighting to dismantle. The criticism was sharp and public. Hattie McDaniel responded with a line that became famous. "I'd rather play a maid and make $700 a week than be one for $7. It was pragmatic, honest, defensive. She was making the best of limited options in a racist industry. But the criticism stung. The money she earned, $700 weekly when working, which was decent by black actor standards, was poverty wages compared to what white stars earned. The studios knew they could pay her less. What were her alternatives? Refuse the roles and make nothing? Hollywood was racist, but at least Hollywood paid. Barely, but it paid. She supported extended family with that money. Relatives who needed help. The black community, which expected successful members to give back. Medical expenses, living expenses, the costs of maintaining a life in Los Angeles, maintaining a public presence worthy of an Oscar winner. In 1945, she bought a home in a white neighborhood. The purchase itself was an achievement. Most neighborhoods had racial covenants explicitly forbidding sales to black buyers. She'd found a way around them. The house was beautiful, expensive, a symbol of success. The white neighbors sued to force her out, cited the racial covenants, argued that her presence decreased their property values, fought to have her removed. The case went to court. She won eventually, but the legal battle was expensive and exhausting. The victory was hollow. She got to keep the house, but lived surrounded by neighbors who'd sued to evict her based solely on her race. The 1940s gave way to the 1950s. Roles became scarcer. The cancer developed. Breast cancer in the early 1950s, before modern treatment protocols, before effective chemotherapy. Treatment was expensive and largely ineffective. Surgery, radiation, hospital stays. The bills accumulated rapidly. She worked as long as she physically could. Television appearances on shows that paid far less than films had. Radio work, anything to generate income while undergoing treatment. But cancer is expensive, and being a working actress doesn't provide health insurance or financial security. The savings disappeared into medical bills. The house, so hard won, became difficult to maintain. Hospital costs in the early 1950s could bankrupt anyone, but they were especially devastating for someone whose peak earning years had never been particularly lucrative. October 1952. Hattie McDaniel dies. The funeral is modest, not the elaborate Hollywood affair her historic achievement might have warranted. Her estate is insolvent. She owes more than she owns. The Oscar sits in a house she couldn't afford to keep, awarded by an industry that paid her as little as possible while profiting from her talent. The Oscar itself later disappeared. Some reports say she wanted it donated to Howard University. Others say it was lost during a move. Either way, for decades, the physical Oscar was missing, lost somewhere between her death and eventual rediscovery. The symbol of her achievement, as ephemeral as the achievement itself. Only in later decades did Hollywood begin to properly acknowledge what Hattie McDaniel had accomplished. Retrospectives, honors, recognition of her groundbreaking achievement and her talent, which transcended the limited roles she was allowed to play. But she wasn't alive to see it, wasn't alive to benefit from the retrospective honors, wasn't alive to see the slow, incomplete progress toward racial equity in Hollywood. She died in debt from a disease whose treatment bankrupted her, having won an award at a segregated ceremony for playing a role that perpetuated stereotypes in an industry that limited her opportunities and underpaid her throughout her career. Hattie McDaniel's poverty wasn't personal failure. It was systemic. An industry that used black talent while limiting opportunities, paying less, offering fewer roles, and then forgetting them when they died. She made history. History didn't pay the bills. The Oscar didn't protect her from racism, and breaking barriers, while important, doesn't guarantee financial security when the system itself is designed to extract value while providing minimal compensation. The first black Oscar winner died broke. The industry kept making money from Gone with the Wind for decades. That gap between those two facts is everything wrong with Hollywood's treatment of black performers. Then, and for far too long after, January 25th, 1960, a New York apartment, Diana Barrymore, is found dead. Drug and alcohol overdose. She's 38 years old. Her autobiography, published 3 years earlier, was titled Too Much, Too Soon. Everyone who read it knew this ending was coming. No one could stop it. The name carried weight. Diana Barrymore, daughter of John Barrymore, arguably the greatest American actor of his generation. Niece of Lionel and Ethel Barrymore, both legends in their own right. The Barrymores were American theatrical royalty, a dynasty stretching back generations. The name opened doors. It also created impossible expectations. Diana was born into fame. From childhood, she was John Barrymore's daughter first, Diana second. Every introduction, every opportunity, every audition began with that connection. People expected greatness because of the name. Because with that bloodline, that heritage, how could she be anything less than extraordinary? The 1940s brought some success. Films, theatre productions, the beginning of what could have been a solid career. She had talent, real talent, not just a famous name. She could act, had presence on stage and screen. But every review mentioned her father. Every comparison was inevitable and unflattering. John Barrymore, at his peak, was transcendent. Diana Barrymore was competent, sometimes good, never transcendent. The pressure of that comparison was crushing. To be constantly measured against one of the greatest actors in American history, to have every performance judged not on its own merits, but against the standards set by her father. To know that no matter how well she did, it would never be as good as John Barrymore at his best. What she truly inherited wasn't talent or wealth. It was addiction. John Barrymore's alcoholism was legendary, as famous as his Hamlet, as notable as his profile. He drank compulsively, destructively, publicly. His alcoholism destroyed his later career, damaged his relationships, contributed to his relatively early death at 60. Diana inherited that. The genetic predisposition, perhaps. Certainly the behavioral patterns, the self-destructive impulses, the inability to stop even when stopping was clearly necessary. She watched her father drink himself to death and then followed the same path, as if the script had already been written and she was simply playing her assigned role. The drinking started young, became serious quickly. By her 20s, she was drinking the way her father had, not socially, but compulsively, not for pleasure, but from necessity. The alcohol interfered with work, caused her to miss rehearsals, forget lines, show up unprepared. Professional relationships deteriorated. The marriages followed the pattern of Hollywood disaster. Multiple husbands, multiple divorces. Relationships built on mutual dysfunction dissolved when the dysfunction became unbearable. Each divorce was expensive financially and devastating emotionally. Each failure deepened the sense that she couldn't succeed at anything, not career, not love, not life. Then came the pills. Prescription medication for anxiety, for depression, for the legitimate mental health issues that accompanied her situation. But pills combined with alcohol become something more dangerous. The combination amplified both, made the highs higher and the lows unbearable. She publishes Too Much, Too Soon. The autobiography is brutally, unflinchingly honest. She talks about the drinking, the failed marriages, the struggles with mental health and addiction, admits her failures, acknowledges the shadow of her father's name and legacy. The book is successful. People want to read about the Barrymores, want the inside story of theatrical royalty. Hollywood adapts it into a film. Dorothy Malone plays Diana. The production brings Diana in as a consultant. She's on set during filming, watching an actress portray her life, her failures, her addictions, and she drinks throughout production. The irony is impossible to miss. Watching a film about your alcoholism while actively alcoholic. The book's publication could have been a turning point, an honest reckoning followed by recovery. But there's no recovery. The publicity generates some work, some income. Then the publicity fades. The work disappears. And Diana Barrymore is left with the same problems the book described, plus the added burden of having aired them publicly. The final 3 years are a spiral. The drinking intensifies. The pills increase. Any pretense of control disappears. She's openly, visibly self-destructing. Friends try interventions. Nothing works. She doesn't want to be saved. Or she's too far gone to be savable. Or she's acting out the script written by her father's example. January 1960. Alone in her apartment. Pills and alcohol. The combination that had been killing her slowly finally succeeds. The overdose could be accident or suicide. At that level of intoxication and desperation, the distinction barely matters. She dies as she'd lived the last years, alone with her demons, her famous name, her impossible legacy, the family curse. The Barrymores were royalty, but their legacy is as much about self-destruction as art. John's alcoholism, Diana's overdose. The pattern of brilliance combined with self-destruction, as if the talent came with a price that eventually had to be paid. Could Diana have been saved? The question haunts her story. If she'd had different parents, a different name, different expectations, would the outcome have been different? If she'd been Diana Smith instead of Diana Barrymore, would she have felt less pressure, drunk less, lived longer? Or was her fate written the moment she was born into that family, given that name, handed that legacy? Was she always going to be John Barrymore's daughter, measured against an impossible standard, trying to escape comparisons through alcohol and pills, dying young in a New York apartment with her autobiography's title serving as epitaph? The Barrymore name opened doors. It also closed possibilities, gave her opportunities, but burdened every opportunity with expectations she couldn't meet, made her famous before she'd done anything to earn fame, created a prison made of legacy and expectation and the ghosts of relatives whose achievements she could never match. Diana Barrymore died at 38. Her father had made it to 60. She couldn't even outlive him by much. The inheritance she received, the name, the connections, the addiction, killed her faster than it had killed him. Too much, too soon. The title was right. Too much pressure, too much legacy, too much expectation. Too soon in her life to handle it. Too soon when the end came. Just too much of everything except the support and stability that might have saved her. The name lived on. The woman was buried. And the Barrymore curse claimed another victim in the long tradition of brilliance and self-destruction that defined that legendary, tragic American theatrical dynasty. December 14th, 1944. A mansion in Beverly Hills. Lupe Vélez arranges herself carefully on her bed. Full makeup, perfectly applied. Hair styled immaculately. Her favorite negligee, blue silk, chosen specifically for this moment. She's staging her final scene as meticulously as any director ever staged a film. She takes the pills. Seconal, 75 tablets, enough to kill her several times over. She's pregnant, abandoned by her lover, broke despite years of stardom. She's 36 years old, and she's choosing to exit on her own terms, looking beautiful, controlling the narrative one last time. The Mexican Spitfire. That's what Hollywood called her. Not a name, but a brand, a stereotype, a box she was placed in and never allowed to leave. Lupe Vélez played variations of the same character throughout her career. Fiery, emotional, comedic, sexualized. The template for how Hollywood portrayed Latina performers, a role she played brilliantly while being trapped by it completely. She was born Maria Guadalupe Villalobos Vélez in Mexico. Genuinely talented, capable of dramatic work, she came to Hollywood in the late 1920s with ambitions beyond stereotype. Early roles showed range. She could do drama, comedy, romance, but Hollywood saw her ethnicity first, her talent second. They wanted the Mexican Spitfire, so that's what they demanded she play. The Mexican Spitfire film series ran from 1939 to 1943. 8 films, all variations on the same theme. Lupe playing a temperamental Mexican wife whose emotional outbursts and fractured English created comedy. The films were successful. Audiences loved them. Lupe made decent money from them. And with each film, the stereotype became more fixed, the box more confining. She wanted to break free, wanted dramatic roles that showcased her abilities, wanted to be taken seriously as an actress, not just as an ethnic curiosity. But Hollywood wouldn't let her break the mold. Every offer was another variation of the Spitfire. Every role reinforced the same limiting image. The money was never top tier. She earned well by the standards of ethnic minority performers, poverty wages compared to white actresses of similar fame. The studios knew they could pay her less. What were her alternatives? Refuse the roles and make nothing. At least the Spitfire films paid regularly, even if they paid less than she deserved. The marriages consumed what money she made. First Gary Cooper, the Western star, a passionate relationship that burned hot and ended badly. Then Johnny Weissmuller, famous as Tarzan, another intense relationship doomed from the start. Both marriages were passionate, volatile, ultimately destructive. Both divorces were expensive. By 1944, she was struggling financially. The Mexican Spitfire series had ended. Roles were scarce. At 36, she was aging out of the parts Hollywood offered to Latina performers. The war years had shifted audience tastes. The money she'd earned during her peak years had disappeared into divorces, lifestyle expenses, supporting family members. Then the pregnancy. The father was Harold Ramond, an actor who refused to marry her. She was Catholic, from a traditional Mexican family where having a child out of wedlock was shameful. But abortion was illegal and dangerous. Having the baby would destroy what remained of her career. Unwed mothers didn't work in 1940s Hollywood. She was trapped between impossible choices. The legend that grew up around her death is grotesque. Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon, published years later, claimed she died vomiting into a toilet. A false, sensationalistic story designed for shock value. It circulated for decades, becoming the accepted version of her death. The lie was repeated so often, it became truth in the public imagination. The actual truth is simpler and sadder. She died in her bed, having staged her death as carefully as any film scene. The makeup, the negligee, the positioning, all deliberate. She was an actress to the end, controlling her image, directing her final moment. She died beautifully because beauty and image were all Hollywood had ever wanted from her. The note she left was brief, addressed to Harold Ramond, the man who'd refused to marry her. In it, she explained her choice, her desperation, her lack of options. The pregnancy had forced her hand. The shame, the fear, the absence of any acceptable path forward. All of it culminated in those 75 seconal tablets. Her estate was minimal. Years of work, dozens of films, a name that audiences recognized, all of it adding up to very little. The mansion wasn't hers. She'd been renting. The possessions were few. The bank account nearly empty. What remained went to family, to settling debts, to the ordinary expenses of death. Her films were mostly forgotten within years of her death. The Mexican Spitfire series didn't hold up, relied too heavily on ethnic stereotypes that became increasingly uncomfortable as decades passed. Her dramatic work, the roles where she showed real ability, were few and scattered. She was remembered not for her performances, but for her death, and even that was remembered incorrectly. The grotesque myth from Hollywood Babylon became her legacy. Not the talented actress reduced to stereotype, not the woman trapped by industry racism and limited options, but the sensationalized false story of dying in a bathroom. Kenneth Anger took her carefully staged exit and turned it into a punchline, a grotesque anecdote designed to sell books. Decades later, scholars and film historians began correcting the record, researching the actual facts of her death, examining her career with more nuance, recognizing how Hollywood's treatment of Latina performers in the 1930s and 1940s limited opportunities and reinforced damaging stereotypes, acknowledging that Lupe Vélez was genuinely talented but never given the chance to show her full range. But Lupe wasn't alive to see this reassessment, wasn't alive to benefit from scholars recognizing her abilities, wasn't alive when the lies about her death were finally corrected in academic circles, even if the false version persisted in popular culture. She died at 36, pregnant and abandoned, broke despite years of fame, trapped by stereotypes she couldn't escape, remembered falsely for decades after. The Mexican Spitfire was a prison Hollywood built, and Lupe Vélez could never leave, even in death. The woman who staged her final scene so carefully had that scene rewritten by someone else, turned from tragedy into grotesque comedy. Even her death wasn't her own. Hollywood took that too, packaged it, sensationalized it, sold it. The blue negligee, the perfect makeup, the careful positioning, all her attempts to control the narrative, to exit with dignity and beauty, none of it mattered. The industry that reduced her to stereotype in life mythologized her incorrectly in death. Lupe Vélez, genuinely talented performer, reduced to Mexican Spitfire by Hollywood racism. Dead at 36 from choices that shouldn't have been necessary, remembered falsely for decades. The waste is comprehensive, the tragedy is complete, and the system that created it simply moved on to exploit the next generation. April 25th, 1972. A hotel room in Barcelona. George Sanders, the suave British actor who won an Oscar for All About Eve, swallows 5 tubes of Nembutal. The dose is deliberate, calculated to be lethal. He's 65 years old. His suicide note is brief, 3 sentences, and haunting in its simplicity. Dear world, I am leaving because I am bored. I have lived long enough. My life has been exquisite. Goodbye. Not depression, he claims. Boredom, exhaustion with existence itself. The note becomes famous, quoted repeatedly, analyzed endlessly. Is it the ultimate expression of sophisticated ennui? Or is it the lie of a deeply depressed man who can't admit to suffering because admission would conflict with his carefully cultivated image? 40 years in film. The career spans from the 1930s to the 1970s. Hundreds of roles, most of them the same character, with different names. George Sanders played the sophisticated cad, the elegant villain, the urbane cynic who sees through everyone's pretensions. He was perfect at it. The distinctive voice, the arched eyebrow, the delivery that suggested intelligence combined with moral flexibility. The roles made him successful. He worked constantly. Won an Oscar in 1951 for playing the venomous theatre critic Addison DeWitt in All About Eve. The performance is brilliant, acidic, intelligent, thoroughly unpleasant in the most entertaining way. He deserved the award. It should have elevated his career to new heights. But George Sanders didn't want elevation. He claimed to despise acting, viewed it as a profession for fools and charlatans, said he did it only for money, treated Hollywood with contempt while depending entirely on Hollywood for his income. The contradiction defined him, sophisticated cynic who needed the very thing he mocked. The personality that made him interesting made him difficult. Studios appreciated his talent, but found him exhausting. He didn't hide his contempt for the material, for directors, for the business itself. His wit was sharp enough to wound. His intelligence made him aware of exactly how shallow most of his work was. The marriages reflected his cynicism. Sajsa Gabor first, a glamorous disaster. They were too similar, both using marriage for publicity, both too self-centered for actual partnership. The divorce was inevitable and expensive. Then, bizarrely, he married Zaza's sister, Magda. That marriage was even shorter, even more obviously doomed. Both marriages cost him money and dignity. By the 1960s, the quality of his roles declined noticeably. The sophisticated villains in A pictures became cheapened versions in B movies. Horror films, science fiction, low-budget international productions. The paychecks shrank with the budgets. But he needed to work because decades of earning hadn't translated into lasting wealth. The money disappeared in the usual ways. Bad investments, lifestyle expenses calibrated to peak earnings that didn't adjust when earnings declined. Divorces, the ordinary mathematics of living long after peak relevance ended. He wasn't destitute, but he was far from wealthy. The suave sophisticate was working into his 60s out of financial necessity. Then the health declined. Dementia, possibly early Alzheimer's. His memory, the sharp intelligence that defined him, began failing. For someone whose entire identity was built on being cleverer than everyone else, this deterioration was unbearable. The prospect of losing his mind, of becoming the fool he'd always mocked, horrified him. He predicted this ending years earlier. His autobiography, written in the 1960s, included the line, "I have always felt that suicide is a very desirable alternative to existence." Not a joke, not hyperbole, a genuine philosophical position he'd held for years. When life becomes more burden than pleasure, when the future offers only decline, why continue? The boredom he cited in his suicide note was real, but incomplete. Yes, he was bored. Bored with playing the same character in increasingly cheap productions. Bored with the pretension and shallowness of Hollywood. Bored with the whole exhausting performance of being George Sanders. But he was also depressed. Genuinely, clinically depressed. In ways his sophisticated cynicism couldn't acknowledge. Because admitting to depression would contradict the image. George Sanders didn't suffer from common psychological ailments. He was above such mundane human weaknesses. He was bored, ennui-stricken, too refined for continued existence. Depression was pedestrian. Boredom was sophisticated. The note's final line, "My life has been exquisite," is either the ultimate expression of gratitude or the ultimate lie. Was his life exquisite? He was successful, famous, talented, well-traveled. He worked with the best directors, appeared in classic films, won an Oscar. By conventional measures, yes, his life was privileged and accomplished. But he spent decades doing work he claimed to despise, married women he didn't love for reasons that had nothing to do with affection, lived in an industry he mocked while depending on it completely. Watched his mind begin failing as dementia crept in. Died alone in a Barcelona hotel room, far from anything resembling home. Exquisite seems like the wrong word for that, unless exquisite means performed perfectly according to a script, in which case, perhaps, it fits. George Sanders played the role of George Sanders flawlessly for 65 years. The performance was exquisite, even if the life itself was hollow. The irony is sharp. He dies broke not from profligacy, but from the simple math of aging. Medical bills mounting, opportunities shrinking, inflation eating away at savings. The sophisticated cynic who'd made a career of seeing through everyone else's illusions couldn't see that his own cynicism was just another performance, just another role he played because he didn't know how to be anything else. His films endure. You can watch George Sanders today in All About Eve, delivering Addison DeWitt's cruel witticisms with perfect timing. You can see why he won the Oscar, why he was valued, why audiences loved to hate his characters. The voice is unmistakable. The presence is commanding. The performance is, yes, exquisite. But the man who gave those performances died believing none of it mattered. Died claiming boredom rather than admitting despair. Died alone in a mid-range hotel room with 5 tubes of Nembutal and a 3-sentence note that raised more questions than it answered. Was he right? Does sophistication make existence more unbearable? Or does it just provide better vocabulary for describing the same human suffering everyone experiences? Was he bored? Or was he depressed and too proud to say so? Was his life exquisite? Or did he spend 65 years performing a role he couldn't escape? The note provides no answers, just the final words of a man who made a career of clever dialogue, reduced at the end to 3 sentences that explain everything and nothing. Bored, exhausted, finished. George Sanders, the perfect cynic, took the ultimate cynical exit and left behind the question of whether his whole life was performance or if, somewhere beneath the roles, there was something genuine he never showed anyone. August 27th, 1961. A small apartment in Brentwood, Los Angeles. Gail Russell, ethereal star of The Uninvited, is found dead, surrounded by empty vodka bottles. She's 36 years old. The official cause, natural causes related to acute alcoholism. The real cause is more complex. Hollywood destroyed someone too sensitive for its machinery, too fragile for the brutality of being manufactured into a star. A Paramount scout discovers a stunning brunette with porcelain skin and haunted eyes. Gail Russell is 18 years old, painfully shy, nearly crippled by social anxiety. She can barely speak to strangers without trembling. But the camera loves her. That face, those eyes, there's something otherworldly about her, something that translates perfectly to film. Paramount signs her immediately. They see $signs. She sees terror. The prospect of performing in front of crews, of being watched by millions, of being the center of attention, everything about Hollywood work triggers her anxiety. But she's under contract. The studio owns her. They expect her to perform, anxiety or not. The Uninvited, in 1944, makes her a star at 20. She plays a young woman haunted by ghosts, and her natural nervousness translates as ethereal vulnerability. The performance is luminous. Critics praise her. Audiences love her. Paramount has a new star. And Gail Russell is tormented, terrified of the success that's supposed to be the dream. The stage fright is crippling. Before scenes, she shakes, can't remember lines, freezes in front of cameras. The natural shyness that photographs beautifully becomes a professional liability. Directors grow frustrated. Crews whisper. The studio demands she overcome it. They didn't invest in her to have her fall apart. Someone, reports differ on who, gives her alcohol before scenes, just a drink or two to steady her nerves. It works. The trembling stops. The anxiety recedes. She can perform. The studio is happy. The problem is solved. Except the problem isn't solved. The problem is developing into addiction. Because once alcohol becomes necessary for work, it becomes necessary for life. The drinking that started as solution becomes its own problem, more destructive than what it was meant to fix. Through the late 1940s, she's trapped in a cycle. Can't work without drinking. Can't drink without destroying her health and performances. The tremors return, now from alcohol withdrawal rather than anxiety. Her appearance deteriorates. The porcelain skin becomes sallow. The luminous eyes become bloodshot. Directors who once praised her now avoid her. The studio that created her star now sees her as a liability. Paramount drops her contract. She's 25 years old. Her career is effectively over. The studio that handed her the first drink abandons her when the drinking makes her unemployable. No support, no treatment, no acknowledgement of their role in creating her addiction. Just termination of contract and a suggestion she get help. The personal life provides no refuge. Marriage to actor Guy Madison fails. Two damaged people unable to help each other, possibly making each other worse. Multiple arrests for drunk driving make headlines. Each arrest makes her less employable. Each period of unemployment increases the drinking. The spiral is obvious to everyone, except, apparently, anyone with power to intervene effectively. 1957 to 1958. A brief comeback attempt. Small roles in low-budget films. She's still beautiful in a faded way, but fragile, visibly struggling. John Wayne, who'd worked with her before, tries to help, gets her cast in one of his films. But she's beyond help by then. The alcoholism is too advanced, the physical damage too extensive. She can't maintain the sobriety required to work consistently. The final years are spent alone in that Brentwood apartment, drinking constantly, not even trying to hide it anymore. Friends attempt interventions. Someone needs to stop her, needs to get her into treatment, needs to do something. But you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, or who's too far gone to be savable. The drinking isn't recreational. It's not about pleasure or socializing. It's about managing unbearable anxiety, numbing unbearable reality, making it through another day of being Gail Russell, the woman who was too sensitive for Hollywood, but got forced into it anyway. August 1961. The neighbors notice she hasn't been seen in days. The apartment manager investigates, finds her dead on the floor, empty vodka bottles everywhere. The scene is depressing in its predictability. This is how it was always going to end. Everyone who knew her saw it coming. No one could stop it. The official cause, natural causes related to acute alcoholism, is technically accurate but incomplete. Yes, her organs failed from years of alcohol abuse, but the cause goes deeper. Gail Russell didn't choose to become an alcoholic. The industry that profited from her beauty handed her the solution to a problem they'd created, then blamed her when the solution became a worse problem. She was too gentle for Hollywood's brutality, too sensitive for the demands of stardom, too anxious for the performance required of actresses in the 1940s. And instead of recognizing this, instead of helping her find a different path, the studio gave her alcohol and pushed her onto sets until she broke completely. The haunting irony is that she's said to haunt old Hollywood locations. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the legend persists. Gail Russell, too fragile for life, supposedly walks the places where she once worked. The story is probably false, but it's symbolically true. Her memory haunts the industry, a reminder of the human cost of making stars, of forcing sensitive people into public performance, of creating addictions to solve problems of the industry's own making. She made beautiful films. The Uninvited remains a classic, her performance still luminous decades later. You can watch her and see the vulnerability, the haunted quality that wasn't acting, but genuine fear being captured on camera and sold as art. And you can know that the woman in those films died at 36 alone, surrounded by empty bottles, destroyed by an industry that valued her beauty but didn't care about her well-being. That handed her alcohol as a solution and then abandoned her when alcoholism made her unprofitable. Gail Russell didn't fail Hollywood. She was too gentle for it, too honest, too fragile. Hollywood chewed her up anyway, profited from her while it could, then discarded her when she broke. The ghost story isn't the haunting part. The real haunting is knowing this happened, that everyone saw it happening, and no one with power to help actually helped. Too sensitive for stardom, given alcohol to cope, became addicted, got abandoned, died alone. The story is simple, tragic, and entirely preventable. But prevention would have required Hollywood to value people over profits, and that was never going to happen. The haunting beauty died haunted. The ghost walks still, in legend, if not in fact. And the industry moves on to the next fragile girl, the next beautiful face, the next person too sensitive for the machinery, but valuable enough to exploit anyway. February 21st, 1985. Palm Springs, California. Louis Hayward, once the dashing star of costume adventures, dies of lung cancer at 75. His estate is modest, not poverty, but nothing like what you'd expect from someone who starred in dozens of films. The man who played nobility, who jeweled and rescued maidens and embodied romantic adventure, dies in middle-class obscurity. The 1930s and 1940s belonged to swashbucklers. Errol Flynn in The Adventures of Robin Hood, Tyrone Power in The Mark of Zorro, and Louis Hayward, perhaps less famous than those two, but successful in his own right, carving out a niche playing dual roles, both hero and villain, in the same film. The Man in the Iron Mask, in 1939, established the pattern. Hayward plays twin brothers, one good and one evil, a technical challenge that showcased both his acting ability and the studio's special effects capabilities. The film is successful. Hayward is handsome, athletic, refined. Everything the swashbuckler genre requires. More films follow. The Son of Monte Cristo, The Return of Monte Cristo, adventure films, costume dramas, the kind of entertainment audiences wanted in the late 1930s and 1940s. He's not as famous as Flynn or Power, but he works constantly. The paychecks are good, the roles are steady. He's a working star, which in Hollywood terms means successful but not legendary. The kind of career that should provide financial security, regular work, decent pay, steady employment for decades. The marriage to Joan Bennett adds to his profile. She's a bigger star than he is, more famous, better paid. The marriage is high profile, photographed extensively. The kind of Hollywood coupling that generates publicity for both parties. It's also expensive. Maintaining the lifestyle of two successful actors requires significant income. When the marriage ends in divorce, the assets are divided. The financial hit is substantial but manageable. Except by the time of the divorce, the swashbuckler era is ending. The 1950s bring different tastes. Television changes viewing habits. The costume adventures that had been Hayward's specialty fall out of favor. He tries to adapt, takes television roles in the 1950s and 1960s. Television pays far less than films did, a fraction of what he earned during his peak years. And television in the 1950s doesn't have residuals, doesn't generate ongoing income from reruns. Work pays once, when performed. After that, nothing. The roles get smaller. From leading man to character actor to occasional guest appearance. The progression is ordinary for aging actors, but financially devastating. Peak earnings happen in your 30s and 40s. Living expenses continue into your 70s and 80s. The math doesn't work unless you save aggressively during peak years and invest wisely. Lewis Hayward apparently didn't do either, or did, but not enough, or invested poorly. The usual story, trusting the wrong advisors, making decisions that seemed sound but weren't, watching money evaporate through ordinary life expenses that don't decrease just because income does. There's no dramatic collapse in his story, no scandalous bankruptcy, no public humiliation, just the slow, ordinary depletion of resources. Money saved during good years, slowly spent during lean years. Savings becoming smaller. The realization that retirement isn't financially viable, that he needs to keep working as long as anyone will hire him. By the 1970s and early 1980s, work is sporadic. He's in his 70s, an age when most people are long retired, but he can't afford to retire completely. Does occasional work when it's available, lives modestly but not in poverty, maintains friendships, stays out of scandal. The lung cancer diagnosis comes in his mid-70s. Treatment is expensive, even with insurance. Medical bills accumulate. The disease progresses. He dies in Palm Springs. Not in poverty, but not in wealth. The estate, when settled, is modest, enough to cover final expenses, some to leave to family, but no fortune. Nothing like what decades of steady work might suggest. Louis Hayward represents the more common trajectory, not the spectacular failure of Barbara Payton or Marie Prevost, not the tragic addiction of Gail Russell or Diana Barrymore, just the ordinary fade. The gradual decline from leading man to character actor to retired actor. The slow depletion of money saved during peak years. The math of living 30 years after relevance ended. Most Golden Age stars followed this pattern, worked steadily during their peak years, earning good but not spectacular money, saved some but not enough, lived well but not extravagantly, then aged out of leading roles, took smaller parts, eventually retired with modest savings that had to last however long they lived. The spectacular failures get remembered and documented. The ordinary fades are less dramatic and therefore less discussed, but they're more common. For every actor who dies dramatically broke, 10 die with modest estates, their peak earnings consumed by time, inflation, and the ordinary expenses of living too long after the paycheck stopped. Hayward maintained dignity through the decline. No bitter interviews, no public complaints about the industry that forgot him, no desperate attempts to recapture past glory, just quiet acceptance that careers end, money depletes, and eventually you die with less than you expected. He survived long enough to see some recognition of his work. Film historians documenting Swashbuckler films mentioned his contributions. The Man in the Iron Mask was remembered as a solid entry in the genre. He wasn't forgotten completely, just relegated to footnote status in film history. His death in 1985 merited modest obituaries, mentioned his films, his marriage to Joan Bennett, his career as a swashbuckler, noted he died of lung cancer in Palm Springs. The obituaries were respectful but brief. The death of a working actor from Hollywood's golden age, notable but not major news. No dramatic story, no cautionary tale, just the ordinary ending of an ordinary successful career. Made good money during peak years. It wasn't enough. Lived longer than the money lasted. Died with a modest estate. The pattern most actors follow if they're lucky enough to avoid the spectacular disasters. Louis Hayward, swashbuckler, dual role specialist, working actor, died at 75, having outlived his relevance, his peak earnings, and much of his savings. Not a tragedy, not a triumph, just the ordinary fade that happens when peak years are brief and retirement years are long, and the money that seems sufficient during the former becomes inadequate during the latter. He played nobility and died middle class, rescued maidens on screen and died quietly in Palm Springs, dueled villains in films, and lost the slow duel with time, inflation, and the mathematics of living too long after the glory faded. The swashbuckler didn't die dramatically. He just faded, like most of them did, into ordinary obscurity. And perhaps that's the most common Hollywood story. Not the spectacular fall, but the quiet fade into financial mediocrity and historical footnotes. We've traced 15 lives across decades of Hollywood history. Different eras, different circumstances, different endings. But certain patterns emerge from the wreckage. Patterns that tell us something fundamental about the machinery that created these stars and then destroyed them. The studio system was designed to extract maximum value from human beings while providing minimum compensation. Actors signed contracts that gave studios complete control over their names, their images, their public appearances, their personal lives. The studios took 90% of box office earnings. The stars who filled theaters earned salaries that seemed large to average Americans, but were poverty wages compared to the wealth they generated. Bela Lugosi made universal millions with Dracula. He earned a small fraction. Veronica Lake's peekaboo hair sold countless tickets. She earned $350 weekly. Hattie McDaniel won an Oscar for a film that grossed millions. She died owing more than she owned. The pattern was systematic, intentional, designed to keep stars dependent and studios wealthy. And there were no residuals. When I Love Lucy went into syndication and aired for decades, William Frawley earned nothing beyond his original salary. When Bela Lugosi's image was merchandised for Halloween costumes and movie posters, his estate saw nothing. The work that generated ongoing revenue for studios and networks generated no ongoing income for the people who created that value. 3 major industry transitions destroyed careers wholesale. The shift from silent films to talkies in the late 1920s eliminated actors whose voices didn't match their images or whose theatrical acting styles looked ridiculous with sound. Marie Prevost and Francis X. Bushman both fell victim to this transition. Stars of the silent era who couldn't adapt to sound's demands. The transition from Hollywood's golden age to television in the 1950s devastated another generation. Betty Hutton, blacklisted by studios, found no place in the new medium. Edgar Bergen's variety format became dated. The studio system that had guaranteed steady work collapsed, leaving actors to navigate an industry that suddenly operated on different principles. The shift from studio-controlled production to independent production in the 1960s destroyed yet another cohort. Louis Hayward found fewer swashbucklers being made. George Sanders discovered that sophisticated villains were less in demand. The genres that sustained certain careers simply disappeared, and the actors who specialized in them disappeared with them. But perhaps the most consistent pattern across all 15 stories is addiction. Bela Lugosi's morphine addiction from chronic pain. Veronica Lake's alcoholism. Marie Prevost, drinking herself to death while starving. Barbara Payton's combination of alcohol and pills. Gail Russell handed alcohol to manage anxiety, then abandoned when addiction made her unemployable. Diana Barrymore, inheriting her father's alcoholism. George Sanders' depression, masked as sophisticated ennui. Lupe Vélez, choosing pills as her final exit. Why so many addictions? Performance anxiety, like Gail Russell's crippling stage fright. Chronic pain, like Lugosi's war injuries. Depression from the constant pressure and the knowledge that you're a commodity with an expiration date. But also, simple availability and cultural acceptance. Hollywood enabled addiction, provided access to substances, then punished addicts for being addicted. The studios created the conditions for addiction. Impossible standards, constant pressure, no support systems, ready access to alcohol and pills, then blamed individuals when they succumbed. Gail Russell didn't hand herself that first drink before scenes. Someone in the Hollywood machinery did. But when she became an alcoholic, it was treated as personal failure rather than systemic problem, for women especially. Beauty was both ticket to success and instrument of destruction. Marie Prevost, Veronica Lake, Barbara Payton, Lupe Vélez, all valued primarily for appearance, all destroyed when that appearance faded, or when they couldn't maintain impossible standards. Marie starved herself, trying to achieve the weight studios demanded, then literally starved to death. Veronica's mystique evaporated when she changed her hair. Barbara's stunning beauty disappeared within years of alcohol abuse. The industry worshipped youth and punished aging. Women were finished in their 30s, discarded when younger faces appeared. Men lasted longer, but faced their own expiration dates. The double standard was absolute. Aging male actors could transition to character work, while aging actresses simply disappeared. Typecasting operated as another prison. Bela Lugosi couldn't escape Dracula. William Frawley couldn't escape Fred Mertz. Lupe Vélez couldn't escape the Mexican Spitfire. Hattie McDaniel couldn't escape playing servants, because those were the only roles Hollywood offered black actors. Success in one role meant imprisonment for life. Audiences wanted the same performance. Studios wouldn't let actors stretch beyond what had proven profitable. For Hattie McDaniel and Lupe Vélez, race and ethnicity created additional barriers. Hattie faced explicit racism, paid less than white actors, offered only servant roles, criticized by the NAACP for accepting those roles, segregated at the ceremony where she won an Oscar. Lupe faced stereotyping that reduced her to a temperamental ethnic caricature. Both were talented enough to deserve better. Neither received it. The financial mechanics of going broke follow predictable patterns. Studios took the vast majority of earnings during peak years. No residuals meant past work generated no future income. Poor financial advice and bad investments consumed savings. Multiple divorces drained resources. Medical bills, especially in eras before insurance, bankrupted people. Living expenses stayed high even as income dropped. And the simple arithmetic, living 20 or 30 years after career ended, meant that money saved during brief peak years had to last through decades of retirement. Some Golden Age stars didn't go broke. James Cagney saved wisely, invested well, retired wealthy. Myrna Loy managed her money carefully. James Stewart made smart financial decisions, but they were exceptions. The norm was trusting the wrong people, spending freely during peak years, assuming the money would always flow, and discovering too late that it wouldn't. Has anything changed? Residuals exist now, but they primarily benefit A-list actors. Child actors still get exploited. Social media creates new forms of fame that fade even faster than movie stardom. The Dream Factory still sells dreams it can't deliver, still creates celebrities it will eventually discard, still operates on the principle that human beings are commodities to be used until they're no longer profitable. Some on our list maintain dignity through decline. Hattie McDaniel worked until she couldn't. Louis Hayward took whatever jobs were available without complaint. Francis X. Bushman greeted restaurant customers with grace. Others lost everything, including self-respect. Barbara Payton died on Skid Row. Gail Russell died alone with empty bottles. The difference came from support systems, personality, luck, some combination of factors that determined whether someone could maintain composure while everything crumbled. Hollywood moves fast. Today's stars become tomorrow's trivia questions. The machine needs constant fresh faces. Those who build the industry are forgotten while the industry continues profiting from their work. Bela Lugosi's Dracula still generates revenue he never saw. I Love Lucy reruns continue making money. William Frawley never received. The films remain valuable. The people who made them are replaceable. Were these personal failures or systemic abuse? The honest answer is both. Yes, some made terrible choices. Barbara Payton's decisions accelerated her decline. Diana Barrymore couldn't escape her addiction. George Sanders gave up rather than enduring decline. Personal responsibility exists, but the system was designed to exploit, not nurture. It promised everything and delivered just enough to keep people dependent. It created the conditions for failure, then blamed individuals when they failed. Despite the tragic endings, their work remains. Lugosi's Dracula still terrifies. Hattie's performance in Gone with the Wind still resonates, however problematically. Veronica Lake's noir performances still mesmerize. George Sanders' wit still sparkles. They created art that outlived them, though most didn't live to see it properly valued. The legacy is films that endure, performances preserved in celluloid, contributions to cinema that matter regardless of how the lives ended. What do we owe them? Memory. Recognition that the glamour we consumed came at human cost. Understanding that the system creating beauty also created suffering. Gratitude for the art they made despite the pain they endured. And perhaps most importantly, awareness that the pattern continues, that the Dream Factory still operates on principles that value profit over people. Picture them all, 15 actors from different eras, different backgrounds, different struggles. Bela Lugosi, dying in his Dracula cape. Veronica Lake, pouring drinks in obscurity. William Frawley, collapsing on Hollywood Boulevard. Betty Hutton, finding redemption in a rectory. Edgar Bergen, performing until the end. Marie Prevost, starving in a Hollywood apartment. Francis X. Bushman, greeting restaurant customers. Barbara Payton, dying alone in San Diego. Hattie McDaniel, making history at a segregated ceremony. Diana Barrymore, inheriting her father's curse. Lupe Vélez, staging her final scene. George Sanders, leaving a note about boredom. Gail Russell, surrounded by empty bottles. Louis Hayward, fading quietly. Some dying alone, some surrounded by loved ones, all dying with less than they deserved. The cameras are off. The lights are dark. The audience has left. This is where every Hollywood story eventually ends. Not with applause, but with silence. The Dream Factory is still running. New faces fill the screens. The pattern continues. Perhaps it always will. Young people arrive with talent and ambition. The machinery promises fame and fortune. Some achieve both temporarily. Most achieve neither for long. All eventually age out, fade, get replaced by the next generation of beautiful faces and fresh talent. But remembering those who came before, their triumphs and their tragedies, is how we honor what they gave and acknowledge what it cost them. Bela Lugosi gave us Dracula. The price was addiction, poverty, obscurity. Veronica Lake gave us film noir beauty. The price was alcoholism and dying forgotten. Hattie McDaniel broke barriers. The price was racism, limitation, and dying in debt. The monuments we admire cast long shadows. In those shadows lived people who gave everything to entertainment and were left with nothing when entertainment was done with them. The films we watch, the performances we celebrate, the icons we remember, all built on human sacrifice that the industry preferred to ignore. The question remains, what is the price of immortality? To be remembered forever in celluloid, while dying forgotten in cheap hotels? To create beauty that outlasts you while struggling to pay rent? To be a star that burns bright and brief, then fades to nothing, while the image remains forever young, forever perfect, forever trapped in the moment before everything fell apart? The answer is different for everyone. Some thought it worth it, the chance to create art, to touch millions, to leave something behind that matters. Others would have chosen differently if given the choice, would have preferred ordinary obscurity to fame's brutal aftermath. But most didn't get to choose. The machinery chose for them, used them, and discarded them. The lights dim, the story ends. But the films remain, ghosts dancing on screens, forever young, forever broke, forever ours. We watch them still, consuming their performances, enjoying the beauty and talent they provided. And we should remember, at least occasionally, that those performances came at a price the performers paid with their lives, their health, their financial security, their peace of mind. Sleep well, remembering them, not as cautionary tales, but as people, flawed, hopeful, talented, desperate, human, just like us, but living in a machine designed to consume humanity and produce mythology. They fed themselves into that machine. It made them immortal and left them with nothing. The Dream Factory's hidden cost is measured in broken lives, empty bank accounts, addictions, early deaths, and quiet desperation. We get the dreams. They paid the cost. And the factory keeps running, keeps producing, keeps consuming the next generation of dreamers who believe this time will be different. It never is. The pattern holds. The machinery operates according to its design, and we, the audience, the consumers, the beneficiaries of their sacrifice, we watch the films, enjoy the performances, and mostly forget to ask what it cost to make the dreams we consume so casually. Remember them. They gave everything. Hollywood took it. We inherited their immortality, while they died with nothing. That's the hidden cost. That's the price the Dream Factory charged and continues charging. And that's why these 15 lives matter, not as warnings, but as witnesses to a system that valued their images more than their lives and their profitability more than their well-being. The ghosts dance on. The films endure. And somewhere in the shadows, 15 voices whisper a truth. Hollywood would prefer we forget. The price of dreams is human, and they paid it.